Okay, hello. I wanted to say that in the last video I was really surprised by how challenging it was to speak and convey complicated ideas in a non-native language for me. I will try to be a little bit more relaxed and to talk freely without a script or anything. So here I am. I'm heading into the second game of the tournament of the Ramat Gan Secondary Masters. The rating range for the tournament was 1600 to 1900, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure about that. I'm heading into the second game. I'm black with 1 out of 1. So my opponent was really young. I don't remember exactly. I think he was 11 years old. He opened with e4. Uh, I only played e5 at the time. I expanded since then to the Sicilian, and my opponent went with knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4, the Italian. I was really happy to see this because I play the Italian a lot. This has been my main opening for so long now. Bishop to c5, knight to f6 is also an option. It's a bit sharper. My opponent played c3, knight to f6, and d4. The Greco gambit, once again a line that I know very well and a line that I played myself quite a bit and I still play in blitz. E takes d4 is the main move. C takes d4, my opponent takes back, and bishop to b4 check. So white can still avoid losing a pawn, he can still avoid playing in gambit style with bishop to d2, but it's still not ideal. I can play d5 at an opportune moment there. He played knight to c3, what I was expecting, the Greco gambit. And I played knight takes e4 because the knight on c3 is pinned, therefore is not defending the e4 pawn. This is a gambit, obviously. My opponent castled. This is the theoretical move. I played bishop takes c3. I'm sort of running through the opening because it's so much theory and a lot of people know this, and if you don't know it, I will try to explain some of the ideas at the end of the line, but I don't want to wait to talk too long about the opening that has been discussed before. I want to talk about the more complicated part of the game that will come soon. So it makes sense, like maybe if you don't know the opening, it might seem like it makes sense to take on c3 with the pawn, but actually after you take on c3, black plays d5, he solidifies the knight, attacks the bishop, and you can castle safely with an extra pawn. So the top move here is d5, attacking another piece and maintaining a threat on two pieces and preventing d5, the solidifying of the center, cementing some weaknesses in black's camp. I played the theoretical move, bishop to f6, keeping the knight on pre. Once again, might seem to you like why wouldn't white take the free knight on c6, take the piece back because it's down a piece. But white plays rook to e1, once again attacking, because after white takes, I can take back with the b pawn and I have a very big center and a strong knight. And I played knight to e7. My opponent took the knight on e4. Now he's back to only being down a pawn, not down a piece. And here there are two possible theoretical moves. I can play d6 or I can castle. I went with castling, although I don't think I will play that again after checking it, because white can play the obvious move d6, drive the pawn right into my camp, stunt the development of my light squared bishop for quite a while, and I don't really enjoy this kind of play, but luckily my opponent didn't play that. For the next time I play this opening, I will probably play d6 first before I castle. So my opponent was the first one to depart from theory. He played right here queen to c2. If you want to derive some educational value and sort of improve your chess understanding from this video, try to stop right here and evaluate this position. Like, this is the first move out of theory, and a lot of the times it's a weak spot for players. Like, you have this momentum, you play theory, like you play theory and you play moves that you know that you've played many times before, and the moment you exit theory, you feel like, I'm not gonna be the first one to play slow, and you play a move really quickly. Maybe it's not even a conscious thing, maybe you're just with the momentum and everything. What do you think about queen to c2 as the first non-theoretical move? So I will tell you, I think it's a really bad move and it gives the advantage to black right away. And sort of the key to understanding that is to think, well, what is black's most natural plan right now from this position? Not even plan, like short-term developing plan. So obviously d6, attempting to free my light squared bishop and develop it. And right away there's a tactical threat. I'm threatening bishop to f5 to pin the rook and win an exchange. So white must react, and white played rook back to e1. Kind of a bummer of a move, because the rook was kind of active there. He could have aimed for the king side. I went bishop to f5 anyway, defended by the knight on e7. My opponent played bishop to d3 to block the attack, and I captured the bishop on d3. So basically, sort of the point of the Greco gambit in general, if we look at it from the scope of this final position, I mean, not really this final position, but let's say the pawn structure. White has some targets on the king side. I mean, the king side is sort of weak just because black is so cramped right now and is having difficulties getting like the queen over to the king side or getting any sort of defense, while white's forces flow very naturally to the king side. Additionally, the c7 pawn is really weak. It's a backward pawn. Backward pawn. It's difficult to defend, and it's held back by the strong d pawn, a very advanced pawn. But now white had to waste one move with rook back to e1, two moves with bishop here, and let's say half a move for queen takes back because I took the bishop, but I got a non-developed piece. I got a pawn move, and I developed the piece, and I took one. Let me rephrase that. I took a bishop that moved from f1 to c4 and back to d3, and my bishop just developed naturally with tempo. I took away an attacking piece for white that was aimed at the vulnerable h7 square, and I traded a non-developed bishop. I was very happy with the result of the opening. My opponent took back on d3, and I played queen to d7. So just trying to develop, maybe preparing for queen to f5 to trade queens, and if we do trade queens, I feel very confident about maintaining my advantage through the middle game. My opponent played what he should have played instead of queen to c2. That's the top move that I know, bishop to g5. Forcing the bishop trade because I don't want white to take and mess up my structure. The bishop doesn't really have another natural square, and the bishop is pinned to the knight. If I try to take on b2, my opponent can take on e7 with the rook. So I took the bishop. My opponent took back with the knight. Don't miss this. My opponent is threatening checkmate on h7. So as I mentioned before, one of the main plans for white is to attack on the king side. I didn't want to give my opponent any weaknesses with g6, just could be followed up right away with h4, or some other rook to e3 maybe could have been good there. I wanted to maintain a solid pawn structure around my king side. I decided to block with my knight to g6, and my opponent played rook to e3. I was sort of hoping for h4 right here, planning to play h5 and attack the pinned knight, but after h4, before rook e1, I could play queen to g4 get the queen right in white's business. My queen is attacking the h4 pawn. It's putting pressure on the knight if the pawn tries to advance. And I'm ready to play, if the knight moves anywhere, I can play knight to f4, or the knight can move to any number of very active squares, and I'm threatening the h4 pawn. Probably white should play at this point pawn to g3, and this pawn might seem like it's vulnerable to capture, but obviously it's not. I mean, white will not be able to capture back with a g3 pawn, but the knight is still pinned to the h7 square. Apparently h4 was the top move of the engine, but it's still a very bad position, and I wouldn't say worried, but I did think that rook to e3 was a better move, what my opponent ended up playing. So I played rook a to e8, trying to trade rooks. I didn't expect my opponent to agree to the trade. I was expecting rook to h3, but my opponent played rook to g3. I don't see any meaningful difference. I mean, there is a difference, but in either case, I play the same move, which is h6, kicking the white knight away from its active post. So the top move and the only sort of active move is kind of a sad one for white, because he's forced to trade pieces even though he's down a pawn, and you can see how his attack might seem kind of scary, but he's losing a lot of steam. I mean, he had to trade a bishop, he had to trade another bishop, my dark square bishop that was a great defender of my king side, and now he's going to trade the knights with the tactical shot knight to e6. Seems kind of scary, but once again, if you try to calculate and see what is white's actual threat, you'll see that you are actually fine as black. So the rook on f8 is trapped, so it's clear we have to take the knight, we can't just leave it there. F takes e6, and we see queen takes g6. Just a trade of knights. And it's an interesting point now. We sort of get a choice. Which pawn do we save? White can take two pawns, and we can choose which one we want to get. Either we trade the strong d5 pawn for the h6 pawn, or we can move the king to h8 and trade the d5 pawn for the e6 pawn. I decided to get a strong central majority and maybe sacrifice some king safety for central play and for some counterplay in general. So I took the pawn on d5, and now I have a passed pawn in the center that I plan to push right up very soon. My opponent took the pawn on h6. The queen cannot be captured because the g-pawn is pinned to the king. So I played queen to f7. No real... This is sort of a multi-purpose move, although it doesn't look like it's doing anything. Maybe it's a move that will be difficult to understand for some people. It's threatening checkmate in 2. If white does nothing, then I can take on an f2 with check and then checkmate on the back rank. But in general, it's just solidifying my king side, making sure that the queen can safely defend any threats around the king side. The queen is also covering the central pawn that I just gained and the vulnerable diagonal to the king. So my opponent played... By the way, there's sort of a hidden threat. If white plays rook to f1 to defend the checkmate, you can try and solve for a checkmate in 3. You can go ahead and write in the comments. I won't show you the checkmate. I'll trust you guys to get it. My opponent saw the tactical idea and played queen back to d2 to defend the checkmate in 2. And I played c5, mobilizing and activating my pawn majority in the center and preparing to just stick these pawns right into white space. My opponent played rook to f1 to over-defend the f2 square. I played d4, advancing the central pawn, and now we can see how this queen is doing a great job of defending this vulnerable diagonal so the king doesn't get checked. And the queen is also aiming at this undefended pawn on a2. My opponent played queen up to d3, just trying to eye up some important squares and making sure that if I take on a2, he will try to trap me with b3. Not really trap the queen, but maybe make it more difficult for me to defend the king side with the queen. The queen is doing an amazing job of defending the king side right now. And I don't want to allow it to get steered away into some, like, I have enough pawns right now, I don't need to take one. That might be tempting, but it's just, it allows for a lot of counterplay for white, so I decided against it. I saw an idea here that I thought would simplify the position quite significantly. It offers a trade of rooks, and it's a trade that white can't really avoid. But I did make a tactical error with that move. I want you guys to see if you can spot that tactical error. So I played rook to e1, offering a trade of rooks. White can't avoid this trade, but it is sort of a tactical, I wouldn't call it an inaccuracy in retrospect. I will tell you why I do consider it sort of a mistake, but try to find the tactical idea for white that sort of reduces my advantage somewhat. So white played rook takes g7. By the way, obviously the point is that rook takes e1, queen takes f2, and white will get checkmated on the back rank. So white cannot take the rook for free. Instead, white played rook takes g7. So a smart idea, a great tactical motif. If I take the rook back with the queen, then the threat on f2 is no longer present, and white won a pawn. My king is way more open. White can take the rook back, and now he has a lot more chances for a draw because my king is so open. He might get a perpetual. If I allow him to push his kingside pawns, he might even win the game. But I had some lucky. It was just luck because I missed this tactical opportunity for white, which is why I do consider this a mistake, even though it works out in the end. White's issue is that I can play king takes g7, and then white plays queen to g3. The tactic still works, strictly speaking, and it is the top line of the engine. The queen is now defending the f2 pawn with tempo because it's check, and next move white will win the rook on e1, and he will gain a pawn back, and he has three passed pawns. We will have equal material, although white's issue will no longer be material. We will see in just a moment. White's issue is that I can play here queen to g6, so blocking with the queen, and white can't avoid sorry. White can't avoid the trade of queens because of the stare down between the rooks. He must get back his material, the full rook that he sacrificed, and white unfortunately can't get out of the trade with check. If he could, if the pawn wasn't here, for example, and he could play queen to c3, then he might have been okay because of how open my king is. His queen is a great asset, but he can't do that. So he took my queen on g6. I took back with the king, and my opponent played rook takes e1. You can, once again, I suggest that you try and evaluate this position yourself. It's a very complicated position. Obviously, I went into this, therefore I was absolutely certain that this was a win for black. So I played d3, advancing my passed pawn one more square towards the finish line to becoming a queen. Rook to d8. We see rook to e8, so white can take the pawn because then we will have checkmate on the back rank. My opponent played rook to f1 to stop the checkmate and get the king back into the action to defend the central pawn expansion. I played c4, solidifying the advanced passed pawn on d3. And here I calculated ahead and I saw the winning continuation. I saw that the king is cut off, the rook is stuck defending the promotion square, the passed pawn on d3. And I realized that if I just had one more, if I had my other pawns helping me, the d6 pawn and the b7 pawn, I could just overwhelm the white rook. So I began with b5. My opponent played f3, trying to mobilize his king side majority, but my pawns are just too fast right now. I played b4. Try to see if you can sort of picture what's going to happen here. Like, what's the plan for black to push ahead the passed pawn? Uh, you can try and imagine it sort of from your perspective as a person that, you're playing this game. What do you do to, how do you formulate a winning plan here for black? My opponent played rook to d2, so he could play king to f2 maybe, and avoid losing another pawn with my rook infiltration. I played d5, and my opponent played king to f2. He really struggles to defend or make any progress because his pieces are so passive. His rook is stuck and his king is cut off because of my rook. He played g4, and I played d4. So now you might be able to get a picture of what's going to happen. So my plan all the way back when we traded queens was that I could play at some point after advancing all of these pawns all the way up. I could push and break through with c3. So that is what we are going to see after white's move. White played h4 and I played c3, attacking the rook. My opponent played h5 and I played king to f7. So the plan was to push ahead with c3. So white's issue is that he can take once, I take back, and if only one pawn was supporting the advance, let's say this pawn was back on b7, white can take, and after I advance, he goes here and defends the promotion square, and my pawn is lost. The problem for white is that two of my pawns are now helping the advance. Sorry. So once I play this, this is actually what we will see. So I went here, my opponent took the pawn on d3, but note that he couldn't have saved this position. I mean, if he tries to take, let's actually look at that. So now if he tries to take here, I take back, my opponent takes here. The job of the second pawn, I mean, it doesn't matter what pawn I take back with, the d or the b pawn, but the point is that now this square is protected. White cannot stop the pawn. So that's not what white played. After I advanced, white took the pawn on d3 with the rook. I advanced, and my opponent took the pawn on d5. He actually kept playing until checkmate, which is, I mean, it's absolutely okay. That's his right. I played pawn to I played pawn to c1, queen. Now I have an extra queen on the board. My opponent played rook to d7. I blocked with rook to e7. My opponent took. This game is absolutely over already, but we did play until checkmate. I guess my opponent was hoping for some stalemate maybe, or some mistake by me. He played king to g3. I played king to f6. He played f4. And I played queen to e3. Let's see what he played. King to h4. I took the pawn on f4. And here, I seem to remember that, yeah, he played a3, and I remember that he mentioned I missed checkmate in one. I delayed the checkmate in one just by a few moves. Queen to f2, king to h3. I played king to g5, h6, trying to scare me, but white has a lot of moves. It's nowhere close to a checkmate. We saw h7 on the board and queen to g3. So this is checkmate. My opponent lost, and now I was on 2 out of 2. It was a way more complicated game than the last one. I enjoyed it a lot more. The previous game was just as complicated, but in this position, I felt very comfortable throughout the game, and I felt like I had control of the winning advantage. And it also felt like a lot more of a challenge. My opponent did pose some tactical issues, and he did try his best to resist. And anyway, I had a lot of fun. This was a great start to the tournament, starting on 2 out of 2. I thank you very much for watching, and that's it. Thank you.